Richmond, Virginia, which is a little bit, let's see, we're getting recorded, okay, which is a little bit south of Washington, D.C. And although my office is based in Richmond, we represent companies all over the United States. We process thousands of work visas every year, including many hundreds of H-1Bs. We process hundreds and hundreds of permanent resident green cards. And I can tell you that, well, we work with companies that range from gigantic companies with thousands of employees all the way down to very small 1- and 2-person startups. And I can tell you that in working with companies all over the U.S., one thing that I have learned over the years is that most employers have absolutely no idea how the immigration process works. They do not understand how you move from being an F1 student to getting a work visa and staying and working in the U.S. after graduation. So what we're going to do here in the course of the next hour or so is to give you a very clear roadmap for how you will move from being an F1 student or a J1 student. Most students are F1, so that's what we're going to focus on. Moving from being an F1 student to getting a work visa and staying and working in the United States after graduation. Go ahead and hit the slide, okay. Amber.
Oops, let's see. There we go. There we go.
Okay, so what I'm going to focus on here today is the visa path that you will follow after graduation. There are work options that are available to F1 students before graduation, like curricular practical training or other things. That is not the focus of today's talk. There are other presentations that I know you will have at Ohio State that will address those issues. What we're going to talk about today are the options available after graduation to help you stay and work in the U.S., use your degree, and work for U.S. companies in the United States. Here is the typical path that I find. Now, there are visa options in the United States that run from the letter A all the way down to the letter V as in Victor. Every single letter of the alphabet has some work visa associated with it. Almost none of them will apply to any of you. This that I have up on the screen is the path that I find that most international students will follow in order to stay and work after graduation in the United States. Now, I've been practicing immigration law for about 28 years, and I've seen lots of presidential administrations come and go. This is one of the worst in terms of how they're treating work visas and immigrants generally. But this path that I have up on the screen remains the most popular path for international students to stay and work in the United States. Every time I turn around, it seems like there's a 2 a.m. tweet coming from the White House that issues some sort of new ban or a proclamation of some kind. But so far, none of them have affected this path for students who are in the United States who want to stay and work after graduation. There are different rules if people are outside the U.S., but if you are in the United States, here's the path that you're going to follow. And Amber, can you see my pointer on the screen, or is that not available? Because the path that you are going to want to follow is first, get F1 optional practical training. Every international student in F1 status in the United States is eligible for 12 months of what they call optional practical training, OPT. If you are in a STEM degree program, very relevant to this audience, if you're in a STEM degree program, science, technology, engineering, or math, you can get an additional 24 months of optional practical training for a total of 36. OPT is the single best way to get your foot in the door with an employer. OPT will allow you to work anywhere in the United States, doing any job, as long as that job is related to your degree program. The employer doesn't have to do anything. The employer doesn't have to notify the government. They don't have to pay any filing fees. They don't have to file any paperwork. All they have to do is decide that they want to hire you. You can go to work for that employer as long as you have an optional practical training work card. It's the card, it's about this big, looks just like a driver's license. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to get that card in just a couple of minutes. But assuming you have that work card in your hands, you are eligible to go to work for any employer doing any job anywhere in the United States, as long as the job is related to your degree program. While you are working for that employer using your optional practical training, for either 12 months, or if you're in a STEM program, 36 months, you're going to want to talk to the employer about getting an H-1B. That's the third bullet point down. I'm going to get rid of J-1s for now, since very few people are on J. So you're going to go from F1, using your optional practical training, to getting an H-1B. H-1B is the most common work visa in the United States, and it will allow you up to 6 years of work eligibility. So you get your initial period of optional practical training, then you're going to get the H-1B for an additional 6 years. There are ways to extend beyond 6 years, but it involves getting into the green card process, et cetera, which will be the next phase that you will want to undertake. So you start with optional practical training, then you'll get your H-1B for 6 years. During the time you're working using your H-1B, you'll want to apply for a permanent resident green card if it is your desire to stay longer in the United States. So that's the typical path: optional practical training, H-1B, and then permanent resident green card. Now, I get lots of students who ask me all the time, look, I get employers who say that they will only interview U.S. citizens or people who have a permanent resident green card. Why can't I just get a green card so that it makes it easier for me to find a job? Well, the short answer is that there are basically only 2 ways to get a green card in the United States. By the way, getting a green card means that you are a U.S. permanent resident. That means you can live in the United States for the rest of your life. You can do any job without restriction. You can travel freely in and out of the United States without ever having to get another visa ever again. As long as you have a valid passport and you have your permanent resident green card, you can travel freely in and out of the United States. The problem with permanent resident green card is that there are only very few ways to get one. Essentially, there are 2 options for getting a green card. There are some other ones, but these are the basic 2 that most people follow. First is a green card based on family relationships. If you have a family member who is a permanent resident or a family member who is a U.S. citizen, that family member can sponsor you to get a green card. Not all family members qualify to sponsor someone for a green card. The family members that will qualify are, 1, what they call immediate relatives. Immediate relatives are parents, spouses, children, or in some cases, brothers or sisters. So if you happen to have a parent or a spouse or a child who is a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, that person could sponsor you for a permanent resident green card. If you have a brother or sister who is a U.S. citizen, that person could sponsor you for a permanent resident green card, except that the waiting period for brothers and sisters is about 15 years or more right now, so there are faster ways to get a green card. If you have questions about family-based permanent residence, feel free to send me an email. My email information is going to be at the beginning and at the end of this presentation, and I will make this presentation available. Feel free to send me an email, give me a call. I'm happy to answer your questions. The other way to get a green card is based on employment. That is, if you have an employer who is willing to sponsor you for a permanent resident green card. The process for getting a green card through employment is a very, very lengthy process, far lengthier than you have in your F1 student program. So for most individuals, it's going to be at least a 1.5 to 2 year process. If you're from China or India, it could be 7, 8 years or longer. But the first issue with regard to an employment-based green card is you have to have an employer. You can't get an employment-based green card until you have an employer. And I've never known an employer to sponsor for a green card until the person has been working for them using a temporary work visa, such as the H-1B. So because the H-1B and optional practical training are so important for people who are trying to get a job in the United States, I've come up with a little document, and I'm going to show you based on using my high-tech audio-visual aid, this thing called my Easy Guide to Hiring Foreign Graduates. And I know that this is available. It'll be available on this Zoom chat for you to download. It is a very helpful piece of paper because it summarizes for employers exactly these options for hiring an international worker. And that is, it talks about the F1 and optional practical training. It talks about the H-1B. And most importantly, it gives employers the type of information that they want when they are considering whether to hire an international graduate. It talks about the timing of the process. How long is it going to take for this international student to get the optional practical training? How long is it going to take them to get the H-1B? So it talks about important timing issues. It also talks about the cost of the process. All employers want to know, how much is it going to cost me if I want to hire an international student using practical training? Answer is, it won't cost anything. How much is it going to cost me if I want to hire an international student using H-1B? There are significant costs associated with the H-1B that I'm going to talk about farther into this program. But the fundamental cost is going to be around $5,000 to sponsor an individual for an H-1B. So this easy guide to hiring foreign graduates, a very, very helpful piece of paper because it goes through all of these issues for employers. So if you are talking to an employer and the employer has questions about the process, give them a copy of this easy guide, and you can tell them that they are free to contact me. My contact information is down at the bottom of this piece of paper, as is contact information for other people in my immigration, other attorneys in my immigration practice that practice immigration law. And we will answer questions for free. So if you are out talking to an employer and you have forgotten all of the wonderful information you have learned today, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to answer your questions. If you're talking to an employer and the employer has questions about how the process works, tell them to give me a call, send me an email, and I'm happy to answer their questions as well. And I can tell you that having done this for a couple of decades, this piece of paper has helped hundreds and hundreds of international students get jobs with employers who have never done an H-1B ever before, because it's a very clear explanation of how the process works. And if they still have additional questions, usually in about 5 or 10 minutes, I can make them very comfortable with this process. And many, many hundreds of employers who have proceeded to get an H-1B, having never done it before, just based on this easy guide to hiring foreign graduates. So if everything else goes flying out of your head by the end of this program, make sure to hang on to that. Go ahead, Amber. Next slide. So let's jump on in, and here is how the process works. So when you're in your last semester of your degree program, you will be eligible to apply for this optional practical training work card. I'm not going to go into great detail about how to get the card. I know that that Ohio State has many programs about applying for optional practical training. It is very important for you to go and attend these sessions, whether it's online or whether they have it just by PowerPoint like this. It's very important to constantly update yourself on the rules for applying for optional practical training, because the rules can be a little bit complicated. And if you violate the rules, you will lose your opportunity to get OPT. And OPT, again, is the single best way that you will have to stay and work in the United States after graduation. So OPT initially allows 12 months of work after graduation. It will allow you to work for any job related to your degree as long as you get the work card. That second bullet point. This work card is called an employment authorization document, an EAD. So you'll hear people talk about their OPT EAD. What they're talking about is their little work card that allows them to work after graduation. To get that card, there is a window to apply. You can apply either 90 days before completion of your program, which is usually graduation day, or you can apply up to 60 days after completion of your program, graduation day. So what I usually recommend is go back to your dorm or your apartment, find a calendar, circle your graduation day, count back 90 days. That's the first day you can apply. You can't apply any earlier than that. And remember, you don't have to have a job offer to apply for this employment authorization document. All you have to show is that you are an F1 student, you are in the last semester of your degree program, and as long as you show that, you are eligible for optional practical training. There is no need to show that you already have a job offer or an employer is willing to hire you. No need for that. So you can apply 90 days before completion of your program. Here's a very important rule, the fourth bullet point down, and that is When you go to your foreign student advisor, the foreign student advisor will annotate your I-20, approving you, authorizing you to get this optional practical training work card. You must apply for that card within 30 days of authorization from your foreign student advisor. So if you go to the foreign student advisor the very first day you're eligible, 90 days before graduation, the foreign student advisor will authorize you on your I-20 to apply for that card. You must apply within 30 days. Do not delay. If you file it, send it out on the 30th day and it's received on the 31st day, you lose. If you send it out 20 days and you have the wrong filing fee and they send it back, you lose. So it's very important to pay attention to file early. Make sure you include all the correct photos, all the correct filing fees. Your foreign student advisor can work with you on this issue. Once that card is issued to you, it will be valid for an initial period of 12 months. Even if you're in a STEM degree program, you get an initial period of 12 months. During that 12 months, you only have 90 days of unemployment time. What does that mean? Well, when you apply for the card, you didn't have to have a job, right? So let's say you graduate, you get the card in your hand, you're ready to go to work, but you don't have a job yet. Well, you only have 90 days of unemployment time that is permitted. So you've got to scurry around and find yourself an employer within that 90 days. And the 90 days is cumulative through that first 12 months. So let's say you get it, you graduate in May. You get an employer, they hire you June 1. So 30 days into your unemployment time, you've lost 30 days of the 90 days. You will only have 60 days remaining. That employer employs you for, say, a 6-month period of time, and then they have a layoff because of COVID or whatever. Your 90-day unemployment clock will continue to tick. You had 30 days to begin with. Then your clock will start to tick at 31, 32, et cetera, until you find yourself a new job, which will cut off that 90-day clock again. Next slide. So while you're working using your initial 12 months of optional practical training, because you are in an engineering program, you will qualify for an additional 24 months. So 90 days before the expiration of your first 12 months of OPT, you will apply to get an additional 24-month STEM extension of your optional practical training. Anybody who graduates with a STEM degree is eligible for this additional 24 months. But in order to take advantage of that additional 24 months, you must be working for an employer enrolled in a program called E-Verify. So you see that second bullet point there. You must be working for an employer enrolled in the government's E-Verify program. E-Verify is a program that allows employers to electronically submit documentation to the government to prove that their whole workforce is legally authorized to work in the United States. Not every employer is enrolled in the E-Verify program. If you are working for an employer not enrolled in E-Verify, you cannot get the additional 24-month STEM extension to allow an additional 2 years of work in the United States. Now, the employer does not have to be enrolled in E-Verify at the time they employ you. They can enroll anytime. So if you join that employer and you've been working for 6 months, and they are not enrolled in E-Verify, you can talk to them about whether they want to enroll. And if they have questions about the pros and the cons of enrolling in E-Verify, tell them to send me an email, give me a call, and I'm happy to walk them through that process. If the employer is not enrolled and they elect not to enroll, you better find another employer if you want that additional 24-month STEM extension, because no STEM extension for you if the employer is not enrolled in E-Verify. You'll also see at the bottom that you get additional unemployment time. Your unemployment time increases from 90 days to 150 days of unemployment once you get the additional 24-month STEM extension. Next slide. So you're working for the employer and you're working using your optional practical training. So you graduated, you apply for the card 90 days in advance, the card comes in the mail. By the way, it's taken about 6 months sometimes to get that optional practical training work card. So you must apply early. Apply as early as you possibly can to make sure that you get that card as soon after graduation as possible. You work for the employer using the initial 12 months. You can get the additional 24-month STEM extension if you're working for an employer enrolled in E-Verify. Then you will want to, during that time that you're working, you're going to want to talk to the employer about getting an H-1B. H-1B is the most common work visa in the United States. Here are the requirements for H-1B. Requirement number one, you must have an employer. Okay, when you did the OPT, when you applied for your work card, you didn't have to have an employer. You weren't even looking for a job. You don't have to look for a job yet. Not so with H-1B. H-1B, you must have an employer. Only an employer can file an H-1B application. You cannot file it on your own. Second requirement, you have to have a degree. You have to have at least a U.S. bachelor's degree or higher, or you could have a foreign degree, a degree from outside the United States, as long as that degree is the equivalent of at least a U.S. bachelor's degree or higher. So you have to have a degree. You don't have to have the degree at the time you pre-register for an H-1B, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but you must have a degree by the time you file an H-1B petition with the United States government. So first requirement, got to have an employer. Second requirement, you have to have a degree, either a U.S. degree or a foreign degree that is the equivalent of a U.S. degree. Third requirement, the degree must relate closely to the duties of the job you're going to perform. In other words, there has to be a very close correlation between the job duties and the degree that you have. There has to be a very close correlation between those. Those are the fundamental three requirements. You have to have an employer, you have to have a degree, and the degree has to relate to the job. Now, under this administration, that third requirement about the degree relating to the job is the single biggest reason for H-1B denials right now. H-1B denials are up by a staggering percentage over any prior administration in my entire career. And this is the single biggest reason, is that the Immigration Service says, oh, wait a minute, well, you have a degree in engineering, but I see that you're going to be an engineering manager. I don't think that that manager job requires the engineering degree that you have. It is our job and your job to show the Immigration Service precisely how your degree relates to the job. So the exercise that we do in our office, and we have tremendous success with H-1Bs. I think denial rates for H-1Bs are up around 30, 35%. Coming out of our office, they're down below 1%. Because we insist that employers and students go through the exercise of bullet point the job duties, and then go back through your degree transcript, and you're going to show me the coursework that you took that prepared you to perform the job duty that you have bullet pointed. And if you can show a close correlation between the job duty and the degree coursework that you took, you will have a very strong H-1B. If you can't show a strong correlation, then you might want to look for another position so that you will qualify for the H-1B. During your OPT time, you can jump around from employer to employer all you want to. All you have to do is notify your foreign student advisor. And if you're in a position where you don't have a close correlation between your degree program and the job duties, you may want to start looking for another position, because that is going to be the single biggest issue that they will focus on. The last bullet point on the page, which is no need to advertise for U.S. workers. Very common misunderstanding for many employers is that they believe that they have to advertise the position to find a U.S. worker, and that they can only hire an H-1B worker if no qualified U.S. worker applies. And that is totally false. And it's very important for you to explain that to employers, because that is a very common misunderstanding amongst many employers. And I have spoken about that on my Easy Guide to Hiring Foreign Graduates. It addresses exactly that issue. No need to advertise, no need to show that you've tried to find a U.S. worker and were unable to do so. You can qualify for H-1B as long as you have an employer, you have a degree, and the degree relates to the job. Next slide, please. So you've started working for an employer using your OPT. You talk to the employer about filing for the H-1B, and the employer files the H-1B petition with the Immigration Service. Immigration Service will review that petition to determine whether or not the degree relates to the duties of the position. If they agree that it does, they will issue an H-1B approval notice. What does that get you? What it gets you is initially 3 years of work authorization. So you'll get a 3-year approval. When you are 6 months away from the expiration of that 3-year approval, you can apply to get a 3-year extension for a total of 6 years in H-1B status. While you're using H-1B, you can only work for the employer who sponsored you. You can't work for anybody else. You can only work in the job described on that H-1B petition and only in the work location described in the petition. Well, what happens if you want to change employers? You're going to be stuck with that same employer for 6 years? The answer is no. You can change and move to a new employer, but the new employer has to file a new H-1B application for you. Every time you change jobs, the employer is going to have to file a new H-1B petition. Well, why is that? Well, because it may be that the first job you had relates very closely to your degree, but maybe the next employer has a job that is not so closely related to your degree program. So every time you change jobs, the Immigration Service wants to review to see whether or not the new position requires the type of degree that you have. Same thing with changing locations. If your employer changes you from one location, let's say they start you working in New York, but then they want to move you to a small town in West Virginia as an engineer. Well, the wages in those two areas are going to be very different. So the employer may have to file an amended new H-1B petition for you. I always tell employers, when you do an H-1B, anytime you change the location, or if you change the description of the job that was offered to this individual, you need to contact me so that I can determine whether a new or an amended petition is necessary. But again, you can change employers. It's just that the new employer is going to have to file a new H-1B petition for you. Next slide, please. So here's a very big issue with H-1B, and that is, what's the cost of it and who has to pay? Essentially, there are two costs. In fact, when students give employers that easy guide to hiring foreign graduates, and the employer looks at it and they go, "Oh, doesn't make it look that hard," they'll call me up just to get some background about how the process works. Very first question they'll ask me is, "What's it going to cost me?" Because they read all kinds of nonsense on the internet. Costs $10,000, $15,000 for an H-1B, which is total nonsense. In replying to employers about this, I tell them there are two basic cost categories for the H-1B. The first is the attorney fee. That's my fee. Most companies do not have in-house expertise to process an H-1B, so they hire an outside attorney like me. In our office, we charge $2,600 to process an H-1B petition. So the first cost is the attorney fee, $2,600. Different attorneys charge different amounts, but that's what we charge. The next category of cost is the H-1B filing fee. The filing fee has a number of different components to it. It seems like every time Congress gets together, they can't agree on anything except that they're going to increase the fee for H-1Bs. Currently, the fee for H-1B, if you are working for an employer that has 25 or more employees, the filing fee is $2,460. If you're working for an employer that has fewer than 25 employees, the filing fee is $1,710. So assume you go to work for an employer with more than 25 employees. The cost of this whole process is going to be my fee, $2,600, plus the government filing fee, $2,460. It's going to be a little over $5,000 to process an H-1B application. Don't worry about those costs. Employers are never scared away by that cost. I can tell you that in our office over the years, we've probably processed 25,000 or more H-1B applications. And I can count on one hand the number of employers who said, "I'm not going to pursue this because of that cost, the $5,000 cost." One of the reasons that we explain to employers, look, this is just, it's a recruiting expense like any other recruiting expense. You pay money to advertise, you pay money to send recruiters off to college campuses. You get a great international student, you want to hire that person. $5,000 is a drop in the bucket compared to how much it's going to cost you to continue to recruit and find a person who is any better than this excellent international student sitting in front of you. So don't be afraid of those costs. Employers are not afraid of those costs, and it is the employer who has to pay. You cannot pay any of the fees and costs associated with the H-1B. They are totally employer expenses. We explain that to the employer on this easy guide to hiring foreign graduates. Next slide, please. So if the cost isn't a concern, what is the concern? Well, the big concern is this quota. There is a quota on the number of H-1Bs that can be issued every year. The quota is only for new H-1Bs. That is, an H-1B for someone who has never had an H-1B ever before. So for example, most people in this audience never had an H-1B ever before. So when you go to get your first H-1B, you will be subject to the quota. Once you get the H-1B, you never have to worry about the quota ever again. So if you change jobs, you don't have to worry about the quota. If you're going for your extension of your H-1B, you don't have to worry about the quota. Only the very first time you get the H-1B do you have to worry about the quota. So how does the quota work? Well, the quota year runs every year from October 1 to September 30. So the quota year that we are in right now starts on October 1 of 2020, and it will run until September 30 of 2021. So the quota will be released in just a couple of weeks. So on October 1 every year, the government releases 85,000 new H-1Bs, makes them available for people to apply to secure one of those H-1B quota numbers. The quota of 85,000 is divided into two different buckets. There is a bucket of 20,000 that is available just to individuals who have a U.S. advanced degree. That is, any degree above a bachelor's degree from a U.S. college or university. So the 65,000 quota, which is the remainder of the 85,000 quota, is available to anybody else who has a degree from anywhere. So if you have a master's degree, an advanced degree from China, you're going to be in the 65,000 quota because that's not a U.S. advanced degree. If you have a PhD from Canada, you're in the 65,000 quota because it's not a U.S. advanced degree. If you have a master's degree from Ohio State, you're in the 20,000 quota. If you have a bachelor's degree from the United States, you're in the 65,000 quota. Doesn't matter what quota you're in. The answer is no. It doesn't matter at all. You don't care which quota you get a number from. All you want is a number. Now, there is a slight benefit to having an advanced degree, but whether you're chosen in the advanced degree quota or chosen in the regular quota of 65,000 makes absolutely no difference. You just want a quota number. I'm going to talk about how to get that in a second. So here we are. We are 2 weeks away from the release of the 85,000 quota on October 1 of 2020. Does anybody have any idea how many H-1Bs will be available to you when they release that quota on October 1? And the answer is 0. There will be none because the quota is already spoken for. What that means is that employers can pre-file to get one of those quota numbers so that by the time they release the 85,000 on October 1, they're already spoken for. So how do you pre-file to get one of these quotas? Next slide, please. Here's how you pre-file. You can see the shaded area on the screen starts October 1 and it ends September 30 at the far right. That shaded area is the quota year. The quota is released on October 1. But now move to the far left of the screen and you'll see the dates, March 1 to March 20. Every year on March 1 and running through March 20, the government has a pre-registration period. That is, during that 20-day time frame, all employers in the United States who want to sponsor someone for an H-1B submit a pre-registration form with the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, the USCIS. So from March 1 to March 20, anytime during that 20-day period, doesn't matter whether you put it in on the first day or the 10th day or the 15th day, anytime during that 20-day period you put in a pre-registration filing, you go into a lottery pool. This year, between March 1 and March 20, there were over 270,000 pre-registrations that were filed for the quota of 85,000. So as you can see, there are many more applications submitted than there are quota numbers available. When the pre-registration period closes on March 20, the government then goes into all that pile of 270,000 H-1Bs or more that are filed, and they will select 85,000 cases to process. They will first select 20,000 advanced degree cases. So they'll take all advanced degree cases that are filed and they will select 20,000 of those to process. Let's say that there were 50,000 advanced degree cases that were filed. So they count out 20,000, which is the advanced degree quota. Then they take all the remaining advanced degrees and they put them back in a pile, they mix them all up. So if you have an advanced degree, you have 2 shots at this quota. So they do the 20,000 first, then they mix them all up, and then they do the 65,000 quota. Once they've done the 20,000 advanced degree and the 65,000 regular quota, that's the entire quota. They now have 85,000 cases to process. You'll be notified whether or not your case was selected, usually by April 1. Once you are notified that you're selected, you'll have 90 days to submit your H-1B petition. Once you submit the H-1B petition within that 90 days, the government will then review it to determine whether or not they believe that the job relates to the degree that you have, and if they conclude that the duties of the job relate to your course curriculum, they will approve the H-1B, and it will be effective as of October 1. So let's look at how this works in process. You'll see at the left side of the screen, I have May on a long line. May is when many U.S. students who are graduating in the spring will graduate. Let's just pick a date. Let's say May 10 is your graduation day. So May 10 is when you will graduate. You can get your optional practical training. You can see if you go to the far left that the pre-registration period, March 1st to March 20, has already passed by the time you have your degree. So is there any way that you could have applied for H-1B during that pre-registration? Answer is yes, you can. If you are in your last semester of your degree program, you do not yet have to have the degree in order to apply in this pre-registration period. As long as you will have your degree by the time you submit your H-1B application, you can pre-register. So if you're in your last semester of your program, you can apply, you can pre-register during that March 1 to March 20 timeframe. If your case is selected on April 1, you then have 90 days to submit your application. So you can wait until after you graduate, then you'll have your degree, and you'll still be able to submit your application within that 90-day time frame. So that's strategy number 1 for dealing with the H-1B quota. Well, let's say that your employer didn't file during that pre-registration. How can you possibly stay and work in the United States if the H-1B pre-registration has already passed? The answer is OPT. You're going to graduate, you're going to get your optional practical training work card, and you are going to look to the following March 1, the March 1 after you graduate. That's when you are going to want to put in your pre-registration from March 1 to March 20 of the year after graduation. If your case is selected in the lottery, then you will put your H-1B application in. They'll determine whether or not the degree relates to the job. They'll approve it as of October 1. And in the meantime, you will be able to continue using your OPT. Your OPT started May after you graduate. It will end May of the following year, but there will be a gap between when your OPT expires and October 1 when the H-1B becomes effective. That gap doesn't matter, because as long as you have been selected for the H-1B lottery, your OPT will automatically extend until September 30. That's called gap relief. So you have no break in your employment authorization as long as your H-1B was selected in that pre-registration lottery. If your case was not selected in that lottery, and if you are in a STEM degree program, you'll want to apply for your STEM extension so that you can apply in the following year's lottery or the year after that until you are finally selected in this H-1B lottery. Next slide, please. Again, you don't need to have the degree that you will rely on for your H-1B. You don't have to have the advanced degree at the time that you pre-register. As long as you will have that advanced degree by the time you submit your H-1B application. You also don't have to have your undergraduate degree to pre-register for the H-1B, as long as you will have the degree at the time you file your H-1B application, assuming your case is selected in the H-1B lottery. Next slide. There are certain organizations that are exempt from the quota. So let's say you aren't selected in the H-1B lottery. You want to look around for an employer that doesn't have to mess around with this entire quota. These organizations that are up on the screen are totally exempt from the quota. They can file an H-1B anytime they want to. So if you want to go to work for a university, or you want to work for a nonprofit affiliated with a university, like a research facility or a university affiliated hospital, nonprofit research organizations that are engaged primarily in basic or applied research are also exempt from the quota, as are certain governmental research organizations like the Los Alamos Lab out there in Albuquerque, or the Jefferson National Lab down in Newport News, Virginia. There are certain governmental research organizations also exempt from the quota. These are the only organizations that are exempt from the quota. Every other employer in the United States is subject to this H-1B quota. So understanding that timeline is very important. Next slide, please. There are certain alternatives to the H-1B. As I said at the outset, H-1B is the most common work visa in the United States, and for 99% of every international student, it's going to be the only option that's going to be available to you. But there are some very limited alternatives that could be available for certain individuals. I've listed them up here on the screen. For example, if you are from one of the countries listed across the top, 5 countries, Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, Australia, there are options that are available other than the H-1B. They're very similar to the H-1B. Some of them have quotas, but they never run out. So if you're from one of those 5 countries, and you have questions about options that may be available other than the H-1B, I would be happy to answer your questions. You can send me an email or give me a call. Next option is an L1 manager, executive, or an individual with specialized knowledge. Our office processes many L1s. L1 is an option for people working for a multinational company. That is a company that has operations outside the U.S. and operations inside the U.S. If you're working for a multinational company, you first have to work outside the U.S. for at least 1 year. Then you may be able to transfer back into the United States using an L1. There are no quotas for L1, but obviously it's very limited, only for individuals working for multinational companies. Another option, we do many of these out of our office as well, and that is the E-visa. E-visa is for citizens of certain countries that have treaties of trade and commerce with the United States. If you're from a country that has a treaty of trade or commerce, China does not, by the way, India does not, so this is not an option available to citizens of those countries. But you can Google E-visa treaty country and see whether or not your country is listed. If you are a citizen of a treaty country, you could work in the United States working for a company owned by citizens of your country. So for example, let's say you're a citizen of Germany. Germany is a treaty country. You go to work in the United States for a German-owned company, you may qualify for an E-visa. There are certain other requirements, but that is fundamental requirement number 1. It also gives you an option, if you're an entrepreneur, to open your own company, because you can go to work for a company owned by citizens of your country, using the E-visa. So with those exceptions, the magical 5 across the top, Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, Australia, or the L1 or the E-visa, there are almost no other options available. Many students who don't get selected in the lottery simply re-enroll in school, go back and get another degree. It's an expensive way to stay, but it may provide an option to remain in the United States if that is your goal. But the bottom line of all this, I know that none of this is particularly good news, but the bottom line of everything is that you must plan ahead as an international student. You've got to plan ahead to make sure you get your optional practical training work card. While you're working using your OPT, you need to plan ahead to make sure you get an H-1B pre-registration filed during that lottery, that pre-registration lottery. Once you get the H-1B, if you want to stay longer than 6 years, you're going to have to start thinking about a permanent resident green card, which is a topic for an entirely different day. But Amber, why don't we go ahead and hit the last slide so my contact information is up there and we can take questions.
All right, so let me get to the chat here. All right, so the first question is, does OPT period start only after we have a job, or does it start after we graduate?
When you apply for OPT, and again, you can apply as early as 90 days before graduation, you don't have to have a job offer. When you apply for the card, you will tell the Immigration Service when you want the card to become effective. You can make the card effective anytime within 60 days after graduation. So again, circle your graduation date. Let's say it's May 10. Count back 90 days. That's when you apply. You can tell the Immigration Service to make the card effective anytime within the 60 days after graduation. So you tell them if you graduate May 10, maybe you want to wait until June 10. Give yourself 30 days before that card is effective. That first 30 days does not count towards your unemployment time. The 90 days of unemployment only starts once the card is effective, which again is what you tell the Immigration Service when you want it to be effective.
And the next question after that, bouncing off of that, says, does the 90 days counter start after we receive the EAD card?
Yes, only after the effective date that's stated on the card. So if you ask the Immigration Service to make it effective June 10, you may get the card earlier than that, but the effective date is the date that starts the 90-day clock.
Great. All right. Next question that we have is, how does H-1B job degree correlation work for a PhD research program? For example, I am a chemical engineering PhD with dissertation in the area of sustainable engineering and getting a job in sustainable research at a non-chemical engineering firm. Does my job degree correlation still hold? Or would
those kinds of questions are very specific. What I would recommend to you is send me your CV. You can email me offline with the description of the job that you're going to be performing. And then you and I can evaluate whether or not this is going to be a job that's going to be relevant and approvable as an H-1B.
Great. Great. Next question. Will all the quotas be filled up every year?
The quota has been filled up. In fact, it has been way oversubscribed, at least for the past decade, and I envision that going forward for a very long time. Until Congress has not increased this quota for many, many, many years. It is clearly outdated. I don't see them increasing the quota anytime soon, certainly not under this administration. So you can expect that there will be this lottery and a limited number of H-1B quota numbers for the foreseeable future.
All right. And then the last question that we have here, if anyone else has maybe another question too, feel free to submit it here as we have a couple minutes left. Will the pre-registration be done by the employer or the student?
Pre-registration is filed by the employer. It's a very skeletal filing, gives basic information about the employer, name, address, that kind of thing. And it will give information about you, copy of your passport, name, address. The filing, my filing fee in our office for doing the pre-registration filing is $500. The government filing fee is $10, which is one reason why so many people, so many companies will submit this application, because it's relatively inexpensive. If your case is then selected in the lottery, then my fee for preparing the full H-1B is $2,600 plus the government filing fee, $2,460. But only the employer can submit that pre-registration.
The next question, what are the restrictions on travel outside the US during OPT or the H-1B process?
Well, here, the general rule is that once you have applied for H-1B, you should not travel outside the United States using F-1. There are some exceptions to that, and particularly under this administration, any travel outside the United States right now is inadvisable because there are so many restrictions, whether it's COVID related or travel ban restrictions that are in place. But assuming that this administration goes away in December, please, assuming that is the case, and some of these restrictions are minimized or eliminated, there are ways that you can travel using your optional practical training, but you must have a valid F-1 visa. You have to have your work card in place, and you will need a letter from an employer confirming that you will be employed upon your return to the United States. But once you file the H-1B, again, it is inadvisable to travel outside the U.S.
All right, looks like that we'll have time for about one more question here. What is your area in dealing with CPT? Could you go over it briefly?
CPT is going to be governed by the university. They're the ones that will approve you for CPT. CPT allows you to work, say, during summers for an internship before graduation. Once you graduate, you're no longer eligible for CPT. So I recommend that you talk to your foreign student advisor about that issue.
Great. Yep, and I'm just putting in the chat here, OIA will be the office that you want to speak with. I believe now that they're having appointments, they have some updates on their website in regards to COVID-19 and how that has changed. So please feel free to check out their website for more information. All right, last question. Does the first 2,000 quota for advanced U.S. degree holders selected based on lottery or the mentioned criteria?
Well, the lottery is the first stage. In other words, they take all this year, 270,000 applications that were submitted. And let's say there were 50,000 that were advanced degree. They pull those out into a pile. They'll then count out 20,000 advanced degree, totally random, not by country, not by major, not by anything. Totally random selection of 20,000. Then they take the remaining, they put it back into the big pile, mix it all up, and then they count out 65,000. Totally random. Once they've counted 65 plus the 20, that's the entire quota. Those people can submit an H-1B petition. Once they submit the petition, that's where you you have to show that your degree relates to the job. Has nothing to do with the lottery selection. That's only after you're selected.